Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be starting our webinar here in about 1 minute. So we look forward to talking with you. Again, for those of you popping in, thank you so much for joining us. We are about to get started here in about 45 seconds or so. All right, it is the top of the hour. I would like to welcome all of you to our webinar for Moreland University about teacher retention. We really want to focus on how to attract and retain the best teachers. So we have an amazing panel with us today that is going to be here to answer some questions and just have a really candid discussion about teacher retention. My name is Faith Burruff. I am the curriculum manager here at Moreland University, and I have been with Moreland for almost 6 years. I've seen education from just about every vantage point, from the room mother to the paraprofessional, to the classroom teacher, school level administrator, district level administrator. So I have an extreme passion for helping teachers be prepared to be successful in the classroom. And with that, I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Eddie Johns, to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Faith. So I'm Dr. Eddie Johns, and I've been in the K through 12 system since 2012, mostly in Asia, including Thailand and China. I did my dissertation on teacher retention in Thailand at international schools, and currently an instructor and clinical instructor at Moreland University.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Michael Small, will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Michael Small. I taught for 8 years in a Japanese boarding school for visually impaired students in Gokokuji, Japan. And I returned to the United States and have been getting accreditation in the United States through Moreland for special education, and completed my teaching certification this spring at the American School in Japan, and am currently taking my praxis exams and hoping to work in New York City.
Oh, that's exciting. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Philip Breed.
Brady, but
Brady,
nice to
Brady.
know, you
Philip
wouldn't have
Brady.
known that. So it's Philip Brady. Nice to meet you as well. I live in very northern Wisconsin, so I have experience working in rural environments and high needs environments, specifically Title I schools. I also have experience working in spaces that have kind of historically a hard time with hate, and work in trying to guide those schools in the right direction, and also serving large Native American populations. And so I have extensive experience living abroad, but I have predominantly taught in rural northern Wisconsin, of all places.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's nice to meet you. And Elizabeth Dubberly?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, I taught for 10 years in Uruguay in international schools before moving to the United States, where I was a Montessori teacher for 9 years. I've been working in the federal migrant education program for 6 years after that. And now I've transitioned to work at a Title I school in the dual language immersion program, working with Spanish-speaking teachers.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. I love the variety of experience and expertise that we have on this call. So before we jump in to our conversation, I just want to set the scene with a little bit of data. So let's look at a few data points here. First of all, there's a survey from the National Center of Education Statistics looking at the 23-24 school year. And it shows us that 79% of the public schools in the US reported difficulty filling teaching positions with certified teachers. For high poverty schools, that number was 86%. A second data point here is that 45% of public schools reported feeling understaffed this year. Again, for those high poverty schools, this was 57%. And a final data point that we'll take a quick peek at here is this stat is from the Education Week article, and it states that 35% of teachers said that they are likely to leave the profession within the next 2 years. 14% said they were very likely to leave the profession within the next 2 years. So we need to figure out how to help here and how to help solve this problem. So we'll dive into some questions with our panel, but I do want to encourage you to please drop questions, comments in the chat at any time. We'll do our best to get to those. If we don't get to them throughout the conversation, we'll definitely get to them at the end. And just please note that our hope for this conversation is to just learn from and with one another and support one another as we go through. So our first question that I would like to post is, from your experience, what are the top 2 to 3 things that you look for in a job post? And I'm asking each of you on the panel, so whomever wants to jump in first, think about some green flags, some of those green flags in that job post that are going to encourage you to apply. Also, what are some red flags that might turn you off and cause you not to apply? Do I have a panelist who would like to jump in and get us started?
Sure. So I think for me, one of the biggest things that I look for is, the school mission and vision, just to sort of, we're looking for a good match, or, I think at least I'm looking for a good match between what what I'd like to do professionally or what makes me passionate and what the school, is vision to do in the future, I guess you could say. And I think some of the green flags are, for example, transparency, having a clear mission. And I think red flags are sort of like having vague or overly general job description, or too much or too little. I think sometimes if there's too much, then maybe it gets overwhelming, but if there's too little, then I think there's not enough to really make a decision.
I think when we're looking at those like mission and vision statements, some things that I'm looking for are they using some sort of authentic language? That's sometimes hard to qualify, but things like positivity, strength, things like that, I'm kind of going, are they just basically using the language that's equivalent to like a stock photo? Versus is there something that shows me that they actually spent some time on it, and that it might embody some of those same premises, but somehow that particular amalgamation of language indicates that that there is that original thought that is there.
I love that. I think that authenticity is so important, and we're always looking for that authentic environment, because you've got to think of it. This is your job. This is where you're going to teach. You're going to spend a lot of time here, and you want to make sure that culture is a good fit. So I love that point too. Elizabeth, I saw your hand up. Jump in. Oh, you didn't want to jump in? Sorry, you're muted. You're on mute, Elizabeth. Sorry.
I'm having a little bit of difficulty with my audio.
We can hear you now.
So the reason I've applied to my last few jobs is because the word bilingual was in the job description. And something I've noticed with teachers that I work with is that often they're in the same situation. They've applied to a job because it said bilingual. It was looking for a Spanish-speaking teacher. And so we have overlooked some of the other important requirements of the job. And so that's something that we're finding in our district, is that we're needing to become more specific so that we're attracting bilingual teachers. We need Spanish-speaking teachers for our dual language immersion program, but there are also other requirements to the job.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really good point. We have to make sure that not just one component is met, but you want somebody who's actually going to fit the need of the school.
So my search is always about what kind of a community is the school, and how do you provide that support through just whatever the school does together or teachers do together, and mentorship. If there's a mentorship program within the school that can really, it's set up to be, so you're helping first year teachers and you have a feeling of support in the school. And that's what I look for.
Absolutely. I think that's a good thing to look for. It's interesting. I was speaking with a previous candidate just last week, and they were going through the job interview cycle. And they said it was interesting because they would meet with different potential employers. And one of the questions they always asked was, can I speak to some teachers at your school? And it was an international educator. And they said they were shocked because so many of the schools, like, it was an absolute no. And they said that let me know that this isn't a school that I really want to work at. So that was a huge red flag. Like, if you're trying to keep your educators behind a curtain, that's definitely a huge red flag. So I think it's important, yes, that culture is very, very important.
Faith, I want to speak to what you said because it kind of goes past the posting of a role. In my current role, I asked if I could actually shadow at the school. And so I actually spent an entire, which is a little bit unusual, but I spent the entire day with an English teacher who I replaced that individual as they moved into another role. But I could see firsthand, as much as you can see in a day, how does the administration interact with the staff? How are the staff with the students? What's just the feeling in the hallway? What's the feeling in the classroom? So the school was more than willing to do that. And then asking in the job interview, how do you deal with discrimination in this space? And then listening to their actual response about how the culture of the students, and not selling a false bill of goods, kind of talking about how they handled it, but then also acknowledging the problems. And you can, I hate to say that to follow your gut, but you can really feel if someone is just saying what you want to hear, or especially after you've spent a day in that school, essentially interviewing them.
You know what? That's an excellent point. When you go to a job interview, they're not only interviewing you in turn are interviewing them. Like, is this the right fit for me? And I love what you're saying. That's a great point. I've never heard of anybody going in and shadowing for the whole day, but that's a way to actually feel the culture of the school and see if it's almost like a check. Does what was told to me in that interview process align with what I'm observing and experiencing when I'm actually walking on the campus? I think that's really important. I love that. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and jump into our second question. And for my panel, whomever would like to jump in and get us started, what advice would you give to HR leaders who are creating job descriptions or evaluating benefits packages? So from your vantage point, what advice would you give them? What's important?
I would think for brand new, fresh out of school, new teachers, it would be important for them to have some guidance with living in the community and where they would want to be, and maybe advice for I don't know, just where they would want to be in the community in proximity to the school, if it would be helpful, just helping them integrate into their community if they're moving from another town or city or whatever. But just helping them feel like they're they've got somebody to support them in their new steps and where they're going.
Absolutely.
I was just gonna say, one of the things is, the school should kind of consider, what kind of candidate they want at the school. Like, for example, the needs of a new teacher is going to be different than the needs of a veteran teacher, for example, and what they can provide is going to be different. So, for example, if you hire a new teacher, then, you want to, you want to kind of like help them grow. You want to help them, turn them into leaders or turn them into somebody who can find their passion in teaching. But then for veteran teachers, for example, you might want that experience for them to develop programs or to kind of like, mentor other teachers. And so, the job descriptions should align with, the needs of the school, but then also the needs of, the type of candidate that you're trying to attract to apply to the school.
It's a really good point. Go ahead.
I would say that with teacher turnover being what it is, and so many school districts having difficulty attracting excellent candidates, it would be great to have a system where everyone knows what the future plan is, like where the job description is already creating a vision for how this person could stay, become a leader in the district. And so to be really clear, to say you will be on an induction certificate for 3 years. After that, you're eligible to advance in these ways. We want you to spend your whole career with us, and we're going to invest in you. And I think that's something that new teachers want to hear. And there's also sometimes mystery attached to what the plan might be.
Oh my goodness, that's brilliant. I love that. Like looking at opportunities for growth from the beginning. Like, and sometimes we hear the term like grow your own, like school systems who grow their own teachers. Well, it's very similar to that, but you're providing a clear path of these are the opportunities for you to grow and develop and advance your career right here within our school system. I think that's amazing.
I think to add on to that, I think just really clear transparency is really important. So, I mean, I know that money is always a sore point and always challenging when we're talking about schools, but at the very least, HR can say, this is exactly what we can offer you. We can start you at this exact point. This is how much we offer for a master's or a national board certification. And so, for example, I recently switched schools, and one of the things is my first school had me in a role of like, they called me a substitute, and but I wasn't actually a substitute. I was creating curriculum. Had no peers. I had no advisor. I was just working completely on my own. And I said, I really need you to count this as my first year because I'm absolutely being a teacher. I mean, look at everything that I've done. And I was just told no. And the new district said, we will count that. We count all our first year teachers as we count them as emergency licensed teachers right away. We will count your first year. And so then I saw exactly, this is exactly how much money you're going to get for this step and this lane. And it was laid out very clear. These are the opportunities we have if you want to make additional money that we need for after school programs, taking on advisor roles. And it was just so crystal clear. And the other school, it was like, and I knew that everyone in this school is treated exactly this way. In the other school, it was always like, but I know she's getting paid so much more, and they started way after me and they don't have a master's. What's going on? And so really, if you can't rise, if you don't have extra funds, clarity, and really look at the programming in your school and the organization of your budget. You don't have a school without teachers. And of course, you don't have a school without students, but the teachers are there for the students, but they have to survive. So are you doing everything are you spending more time trying to do social media campaigns than investing in your teachers? Because your teachers have to survive. And we don't need to be rich, but we need to be able to pay to stay in the job. Otherwise, we're forced to leave teaching, right? And so you have to look at least the transparency, and are you really allocating your funds appropriately?
Wow, I love that. Thank you. I'm going to jump, that kind of helps us jump into another area that was hit on just a little bit. I know, Philip, you said, you just recently transitioned out of a job. So from your experience, what are the top reasons that teachers decide to leave a particular school or district, and why have you quit teaching jobs in the past?
Yeah,
Philip, I'll have you start us off.
absolutely. So I think, from a general perspective, and I was just talking about this with a colleague this morning, and I said, we want to see administrators in our classrooms, but in a very specific way. We're not looking for you to come and observe us and tell us you didn't have your ICANN statement on the board. Are you really hit? It's really imperative that to have those standards aligned. Well, I think in general, teachers really want their curriculum and their work to be really of high value and work, because there's a lot of integrity in the role in the field. But we want to actually say, hey, why don't you come and spend an entire class period with me? Or why don't I do hall duty and you take over my class for a period? I'll set you up for success. So I think that we want to see those administrators remembering what it's like to be a teacher if they were formerly a teacher. And then on a personal note, but then I think in general, teachers need to, we talk a lot about Maslow's before Bloom's in our educational processes. Teachers need to feel safe too. If they always feel that the administrator is looking for them to fail, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. This applies to all teachers, but you have to be particularly mindful of marginalized populations. So we're looking at our Indigenous folk who have generational trauma. We're looking at other people of color who are so used to looking over their shoulder for their own safety that an administrator who isn't working with them collaboratively, and I mean really getting in there, helping them with their lesson plans, sitting down with them at least sometimes as much as possible, where is that trust coming from? And then my experience as a gay educator is that I also have that same worry. At least that was the case. I mean, I can already tell you that in my new role, and that is why I left my previous role. And I stayed there for as long as I possibly could because I grew up in that school and I created a lot of wonderful, like thriving drama programs and things like that. But I can already tell you that it's a completely different experience in my new role. My supervisor's in my room going, hey, your room looks great. How are you doing? You're missing an ICANN statement. I said, I said I'd like to take an hour out of my planning period to work with Moreland today. And she goes, use my office.
Oh,
just the things like that. So, I mean, you really have to humanize your teachers and support them, make them feel safe.
wow. Very good. Very well said.
And just, I think everything that Philip said, I mean, I agree with like 100%. I mean, when I was doing my dissertation research, I mean, the number one thing that came up, across all of the participants was, lack of administration support and transparency, for example, were reasons why, teachers leave, the school. And I think sometimes what happens is that sometimes there's a lot of gaslighting that happens. They say one thing, but then don't actually, do it, I guess you could say. And so I think that is very important, like, actually being on the grounds with the front, the front lines and kind of like showing, teachers that you care and that you want to be a part of the process, like Philip explained, is really very important. I mean, it's, that's something that is, it's not money, although money always helps a lot of the times, but like, if you see, the principals or the administrators actually being there with the teachers, with the students, it means a considerable amount, I think.
Great. All right. Anyone else want to jump in on this topic? Okay. I will say one area that I would just add to this conversation, a reason that I've seen teachers leave different school districts, it goes back into that lack of support. But I think it's those first year teachers like needing support with classroom management, needing a mentor, needing someone to be there and walk with them through those trenches, because it can be tough being a first year teacher. And I think schools need to do a better job of having support in place to help guide them, from the administrator to mentors to different teachers that can step in and help in that area. So thank you.
I kind of want to just sort of add one thing. I think sometimes, at schools, there's sort of a lack of kind of communication on what, everybody's kind of feeling. I think sometimes like, you know, when there's teachers, like they think, oh, I don't know what the administrators do, and also vice versa for the administrators. And I think sometimes there's kind of like this disconnect of empathy. You know what I mean? I know that administrators have a lot of things that they have to do, but also teachers have a lot of things. And then I think sometimes they kind of operate in these silos, as thus us against them, versus trying to build a community and understand what everybody does. You know what I mean? When everybody understands what everybody's doing and is kind of working to help each other, I think sometimes, you know, it's more of that family factor that makes everybody kind of go forward, if that makes sense, to make everything better for everybody. If that, yeah.
It does.
I
It
agree
does.
with
Go
that. Sorry. And that's why I mentioned the mentorship program before and how important that is. I was even thinking, you know, if teachers are leaving, if they're retired, if they could just come back in, you know, like occasionally in the school, within the school system that they've been working in, and help the new teachers and give them their advice. So it's not a burden to the people that are the other teachers that are there. It would be something that they could offer to them, and, you know, just mix it in a little bit more. But I feel like retired teachers are also a wealth of information.
Yes,
Help
they
with that
absolutely are.
process too, yeah.
Oh, yes. Well, that dovetails perfectly into the next conversation. We've kind of hit on this a little bit. I've heard several of you mention, you know, we know salary is a big issue. And if we could pay teachers more, that would probably go a long way for improving teacher retention. But let's put that aside. So aside from pay raises, what can administrators do to improve job satisfaction? And we hit on that just a little bit now. And on the flip side, what should they avoid? So what actions, even seemingly small, and now I know the, you know, coming in and pointing out what you're doing wrong, we just discussed that. Anything else can administrators avoid that will make teachers less happy at work?
I'm in a good position right now. The timeliness of this this training is good, just based off of what just happened in my professional life and shifting schools. Something that I think that is really positive that I've seen from administration where I'm at currently is that nobody left when I came to this role. Somebody retired. So the district had funding to move someone from an academic resource coordinator, and that person slid into a guidance counselor role. And then the teacher in my role slid into that academic resource coordinator role. And then today someone was retiring. And so I felt comfortable enough to sit down and talk to my principal. He said, hey, I see the Spanish teacher roles open. And I said, I've been interpreting for a number of years. I said, you know, and I felt that I could at least have that conversation. Right. And it wasn't that immediately it was like, oh God, it'd be in bad taste. You know, I just got this awesome new role. I should be lucky to be, you know, I'm lucky to be here and have a job at all. But I just knew there wouldn't be any repercussions for just having that conversation. And she said, well, what if we did like a hybrid role? And we started to talk about that. So, because I've seen in other schools, my own and others, people sometimes almost being penalized for being too good at their job. Teachers wanting to be, you know, being a world language teacher, wanting to be an ELA teacher, kind of being told to stay in that role, because how are they going to fill that, instead of trying to like capitalize on because passion, it helps a lot. It feels like its own form of currency, because the time becomes more rich because you're doing the things you do in your own time anyway. And if you're a literature teacher who just absolutely loves to read, and teaching a reading class is going to feel like a pleasure because it's your hobby. If you like to be learn languages, and you see those types of prospects, maybe the person is really STEM or STEAM motivated. So maybe the math teacher can create a new hybrid role or have a new class. So basically allowing an educator to thrive within their natural talents, and just like making them feel comfortable to talk about that with their boss. Because the worst that's going to happen is saying, we can't facilitate that right now, but let's keep dreaming.
Yeah, I love that.
Something our district has done is we're planning collaboratively. And so at our school, every day teachers have their planning period and it's occupied. It's occupied with meaningful work, collaborating with peers. But I think that if there was a protected time of planning, that would really sweeten the deal for anyone looking to work here. Saying you will have one period a week that your planning is protected. Something very wonderful in our school is we have extended planning by discipline. So once a quarter, you will have planning with other Spanish teachers, but you get to do your work. You'll have math extended planning, and it's a half day. You get a substitute, and it's very meaningful. People get to really get a lot done. We have a lot of PD that's fantastic and meaningful, but it means that people's planning is not protected.
Yes. It's a great point. Protected planning is definitely something that I don't think any teacher would scoff at that. They would be very, very excited about that. Great. Any additional thoughts before we move forward?
Yeah,
I
I
wanted
was just gonna go ahead, Philip.
Nope, I'll go second.
Sure. I mean, well, sort of, in terms of sort of, and I know we're not supposed to talk about teacher salaries, but the fact of the matter is, like, if you pay teachers enough, they're going to they're going to be more likely to deal with a lot of stuff. And so, if you don't have the funding to do that, then, essentially you need to provide other opportunities, that are, more intrinsic to kind of, keep the teacher going, essentially. But in terms of things that administrators should avoid, I think, the lack of transparency, or, not making what am I trying to say? Not making efforts to kind of involve teachers in the process of developing or building the school, of, just making decisions, and then not, even kind of hearing what the teachers have to say is a big thing, because it's kind of like, well, it kind of gives the perception that they don't care about what the teachers think, even though they're the ones in the front lines doing things. So, so top-down decisions can be very harmful, even though maybe it's what needs to happen. But I think involving teachers in the process is a very good way, because sometimes teachers have, a lot of times teachers will have really great solutions. That, and for example, having unproductive, time-wasting unproductive meetings sometimes can be kind of cumbersome for teachers as well, if that makes sense as a small thing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think the protected planning is really essential. Because to Eddie's point, the teachers have a lot of work, and there's kind of an infinite amount of work in general. And so if you can't increase funds, you can at least protect the teacher's time so that they can do the job to the fidelity that you want regardless. And then on professional development, that should really be something that's faculty led, as opposed to an administrator initiative, unless we're talking about, like, you're not meeting a certain level of state compliance, and that's the faculty then has to hit that. Because who is that for? If the faculty is interested in certain professional development, that's to enhance them as individuals. Again, that's a form of currency, and it also enhances that they're teaching. So it's not necessarily what you would think, but that right off the bat, but that should improve those statistics that the administrators are looking for, as opposed to saying, this is what we're going to do, and the teachers aren't interested. It's just like a student, if the teacher isn't interested or doesn't see the inherent value of that work, they'll go through the motions, but what is the depth of learning, and what is the depth of execution after the moment?
I love that. Well, I'm going to go out of order on our questions, because you just jumped into a hot topic, which is professional development. So let's talk a little bit about professional development here for a few minutes. How important is it for job satisfaction, and what should HR leaders make sure they're doing for teachers, and what should they avoid? So let's think about that professional development. I love the first bullet point is very clear: faculty-led professional development makes perfect sense to me. But let's dive into that professional development topic just a little bit deeper.
I think
incredibly important. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, I think it's incredibly important for, if nothing else, just to discuss things like, I'm sorry, that's my husband and he's calling, sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
Sorry about that. But incredibly important for, if nothing else, technology and the use of AI and the just like every day, everything is changing every single day. And how do you keep up with that? And you know, I think everybody needs it, not even just teachers. I think we all need to be educated on that and how to, but professional development is, and how you use that within your classroom too. And yeah, it's incredibly important.
Yes, absolutely.
I would just, sometimes I talk with my, to kind of add on to that, I talk with my friend who's working in the public schools system right now. And it's kind of interesting because him and his partner they took this sort of state funded PD over the summer last year, and they would kind of make fun of the PD about how it's really boring, and it's sort of just as sort of like an asynchronous program that is just you're kind of going through the process to like make it happen. And they essentially they were doing it because if you do a certain amount of PD you get a raise, for example, or you get in a higher level. And I find it kind of interesting how sometimes a lot of PD can be very useful and very interactive, engaging, but at the same time sometimes the PD that is created is kind of redundant or kind of boring. And so it's interesting how like nowadays there's a push for teachers to be much more engaging, but then you take a look at the PD opportunities that are provided to teachers, and they're kind of the opposite. They're just PowerPoint presentations which is filled with words, which we know is not the best way to have a PowerPoint. So I think it is very important, and I think it's a tool, and I think sometimes maybe there's just too many things to do, or there's I think sometimes if there just can be more of an applying of the best practices in what we're trying to do as teachers into the actual PD, it becomes much more useful versus just this tool to get a higher raise. I'm just doing it because at the end of the day we want the PD to be useful, but if it's not interactive, if it's not engaging, then we're just doing it to click buttons to get out of it, if that makes sense. So it's yeah, so that's kind of, I just thought I would share that experience.
I'm always trying to look at, like, I want to be a better teacher. I want to be more efficient in the classroom. I want to be a better learner, and I want to have a better time doing it. And so, back to the point of like faculty led, a good example of how to not go about doing it. I did a continuing ed course on my own through Stanford about data science, and it was by Joe Buller because I had read her book, Limitless Mind, and I was really excited about it. And I was a math teacher, and I predominantly taught English language arts, and then my background is in performing arts and music, and then in language acquisition. And I was just so excited by this math instructor about learning about how we can create neural connections and how we can bring that into our classroom, and teaching kids that like space of like a little bit of struggle and how much they can grow in that space. And then that translated into my education. And I just said, I brought this to my principal and I said, I'm really excited about this. I went out of my way to put my own money into it because I'm so excited about it. And I've had other teachers read it. And I really really want this for our PD. I think this could really help us, because it's kind of like it's the 2.0 of Carol Dweck's growth mindset. They're actually colleagues and work together. And but I was really excited. And I just got, I think we really have to continue our work around standards-based grading. And I was just like, but all those books are the same. It's a wonderful in concept, but it's more of a reorganizational model as opposed to getting under the hood and really going into the learning science and the pedagogy. And so I felt pretty beaten down, and it was very clear that the conversation was over. And so it was like, I've put years and of excitement in this. I was willing to just do extra work just because I was so excited.
Yes.
So if a teacher's really excited, encourage them, foster them. And they might be just if they're a young pup that's just like wild, then grow them, let them spend some time on it, help develop them. So then maybe when they're ready for that, then the veteran teachers, or maybe pull veteran teachers in, so that then it can be an excitement that's shared for the older and the newer. And then the space for, like, you've got artificial intelligence is going to come up organically because you're talking about learning science.
Yes. Oops.
Agree with a lot of what I've heard from Philip and from Eddie. I think that we really have to balance it. In our school district, I'm in Georgia, we have new curricular resources. We have new state mandates this year. Everybody has to teach reading a different way. I'm in an elementary school. And so I think it's a real balance between, we have 1 hour a week of PD after school. I don't want to stay for 2 hours, and so it's tough because we have these things that the state requires us to do, that our curricular resources require us to do. They came over the loudspeaker, excuse me, in a school. But also, I want to hear from my coworkers. I want to hear what somebody's excited about, somebody who's discovered something incredible. It's a balance.
It is. It's 100% got to be a balance. Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for those points. Okay, well, the next question may tie into PD or may not. So I want you to just take a minute to dream with me here. So I think questions like the one I'm about to pose can help us to kind of focus in and zone in on our most urgent needs. So to our panel here, I would ask, if you had $100,000 to increase job satisfaction for teachers, how would you spend it? What would be the very first thing you would do with that money?
I'm thinking about, how are we creating complementary curriculum that's fun? I'm thinking, I'm really privileged in the sense that I live in a space that is just rich with outdoor activities, right? It's actually harder to access culture that you would see in a city here than it is nature. But I can tell you that, and this would have to look different for every school and every district, because it's just, we're all in different places meeting different needs. But I'm seeing that and I'm going, okay, I'm seeing bike rides. I'm seeing getting kids on a boat. We're gonna go fishing. We're gonna go spend some time learning about different rocks, but we're not gonna learn about them in a classroom. We're gonna actually go on a thing and say, hey, check out this. This tells me a story. So how are we infusing fun and storytelling into our, because that's going to make it applied curriculum immediately. And then the teachers are playing. And one of the best parts about being a teacher is you get to connect with the kid side of yourself.
I love that. Okay, who else would like to jump in? Where would you put that money?
I think for me, sometimes, schools don't lack resources, but I think, like, for example, I would use the $100,000 to create sort of kind of like a grant program to fund teacher-led projects or programs that, will allow them to pursue their passions. Because, sometimes, like, for example, I think Philip had brought up, like, for example, teachers will get like really, he was creating something. And I think, one of the things that could be really good for administrators to like provide, like, write up your program. Here's like, $1,000 or like, $5,000, depending on how much you need and stuff like that. And I think that, kind of showing that support to fund an actual program is really valuable. And then if there could be sort of like a small, it doesn't have to be a very large stipend, maybe, a couple $100 or something like that as an additional stipend for doing this could be, something just to kind of, the cherry on the top, I guess you could say. So, that's one of the ways that I would use $100,000.
Awesome.
I love those ideas. And I think that, I just went crazy and thought like $100,000 for my building, right? It's not like to spread around the whole universe. But I think if I could go to every teacher in our building and say, find something that you're great at and that you can tell the rest of the school about, right? So sort of going in with Philip's idea of like PD faculty led. And then also let's let's write a proposal for you to go to a conference where you can learn more about that. Or, you know, we have got $5,000 set aside to make that, whatever you're great at, to make it amazing. Like, you want to take a course, let's do it. You want to go to a conference, awesome. You want to go visit a place where they can teach you how to, you know, bike ride to learn about rocks, awesome. There's a place in northern Wisconsin, there's somebody who's really good at that, we're going to send you to visit. That would be incredible, you know, so that everybody, I think, would feel super invested in the school and in the PD itself. But it's kind of connecting whatever we're doing to what the teacher's good at, and then empowering them to share it and get better at it.
That's an amazing idea. I love it. And I love how you're looking at how to spread this around the entire school. Like, how can we, you know, ignite that excitement that Philip was talking about earlier, that, you know, you come with this excitement, you're already stoked about something. And then somebody says, like, Philip, how would you have felt if your administrator said, hey, you know what? I want to pay for you to go to another conference to learn more about it. Then come back and share this. Let's ignite this. I mean, that would have gone in a completely different direction. And that could have caused a completely different outcome in how you felt about your position at the school too. So it's so interesting. Michael, what about you?
I have a little bit of a backdoor idea about this. So,
Ooh.
Okay.
there's around Stanford University, there is an area called Professorville. And Professorville is reserved for only professors at Stanford. And they obviously have a different income than Silicon Valley, you know, startups, or, you know, the investors or people that work in Silicon Valley. So they reserve these homes for people that are at the university, and it's based on their own income, their own salary, for what they can afford. So only professors can buy these homes. So
Okay.
I feel like in communities where you're trying to attract new teachers, you know, that are going to be potentially there for 20, 25 years, you want to invest in how they're able to live there. And I would use that 100,000 to get the shop department or the woodworking department in the high school to come and work on a project and maybe renovate a house and make it into teacher housing, and put an investment into another fund that would be for new teachers to set up their classrooms. So it would be a continual spin-off of an investment, with part of that 100,000 to provide startup money for teachers for their new classrooms. I would just do it in a way that it's financially supportive of teachers, but it's not handing it to them. And it would probably take a 501c3 to create those housing things, but I just have different ideas of how I would use it. That's
I
me.
love that. Oh,
I think
that's a
that talks about
fantastic item.
I think it talks to community too. I mean, I
Yes.
think it's like, for those who have lived abroad or ever had the privilege to live in like smaller communities or live in like European community, anytime you can actually have like, I use European community as kind of an analogy, because especially in the United States where we have such sprawl, you know, walking to the grocery store, walking to your house, walking to your place of work, and walking to your friend's house and place to exercise is almost impossible. Or if it is, it's because, by golly, I'm going to do it. Versus if you, like, when I lived in France, it was almost impossible not to do that. And so what I'm hearing is an underthought of like Michael's talking is that, how are we investing in community? How are we making this just, you know, it's like where our lives are so rich that we're not necessarily looking at dollars, we're looking at the life of the teacher, and then the community of the school is so vibrant that it's like, I'm good.
Yeah.
You know, I just want to be here.
And keeping them there and making it feel like they're welcome and that they're purposeful for their, you know, that it's the welcoming part. I also want to add that I noted that the Calibri group is now in an ownership, I guess, of Moreland. And they also have a real estate group. So I was thinking maybe we could bring these things together.
Oh, that's a good idea. We will have to post that. That's
That's a good idea.
fantastic.
There's a suggestion box somewhere. I would stuff it with that.
Yes. I love that suggestion. I think some of the themes that I have heard throughout this, definitely we're looking for transparency. We are looking for support. We are looking for a positive culture. And those are the things that are going to continually draw us in as teachers and help us to feel safe and to want to invest in a future with a different school system. So this has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. I want to make sure we leave enough time for our audience to ask any questions that they have. So audience members, please do feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. You can also shoot us a direct message if you prefer. In the meantime, while we give folks a couple minutes to type their questions, I'd like to encourage you to scan the QR code on the screen. It's for a great new blog post from one of our partners at Moreland. Her name is Julie Alm with Noble Education Initiative, and she wrote an absolutely fantastic piece for us to share with you on practical tips for increasing teacher retention. So definitely worth the read. Thank you so much, Julie, for providing that for us. So I'm just going to pause here for just a moment, and let's see if we get some questions in the chat from any of our attendees. Okay. Would love to hear thoughts on the best or most effective ways for administrators or HR leaders to gather input and feedback from teachers. So as a teacher, are you okay with email surveys, in-person feedback sessions? Is there something else?
I think for me, so for example, surveys can be really a good way to get sort of like formal data, but sometimes I think the best way to get data is kind of word of mouth. And the only way that you can do that is to actually create genuine connections with teachers and to kind of almost like find out, if you have those connections, they're going to let you know what they think or what what the word is on the road. And then from there, you can kind of design the surveys to kind of like be more effective for, gathering information.
Agree. And we had some feedback in the chat, like their district feels like they've surveyed them out. I can relate to that. I've been at schools before where it just seems like they're constantly coming. So I like the idea of word of mouth. Any other suggestions?
I would say I felt that so I wrote my dissertation about teacher experience. And something that I found that was really effective was I tried surveys, I tried all sorts of ways to gather data. And I hit upon phenomenological educational research. And you're asking, there's an interview protocol, it's 4 interviews, but I found that I could ask teachers one question. And it was, one of the questions was like, tell me an experience that sort of summed up your life as a teacher. And people want to tell you. And so, in recording this, and then, people would have to say, like, either write it to me as an email, or would you give me permission to record it? People want to tell a story. And when they can tell a story about something that they loved about being a teacher, you can ask some follow-up questions like, that was a long time ago. Tell me why you haven't felt excited about being a teacher in 20 years. And you can follow up. And so it's, on the one hand, like a very simple question, like tell me about an experience that you had that you loved being a teacher. But you can ask follow-up questions, and you can also get some really rich data because people want to talk about something that was wonderful or made them happy. And it will also lead into other questions like, and now I don't have time to ever do that anymore, or now I'm not supported in this way.
Yes.
So I think that might be a meaningful idea.
I love that qualitative methodology of gathering that information, allowing people to be heard and to share their stories. Absolutely.
Faith, I want to answer LaShawn Winston's questions about any suggestions for recruitment methods on attracting diverse candidates to urban school communities. I can I can say that a lot of times if people are trying to move cities, they don't know how to live in that city. So for example, I currently live in a rural environment, but I lived in Minneapolis for a long time, and I've lived in Buenos Aires and northeastern in France, but all of those similarities is I kind of knew how to navigate those cities. I was actually really seriously looking at moving to Chicago, and I was just like, I can't quite figure this out. So if I make this much money and my school's here, and which neighborhood would I be able to live in? And like, how could I get there? So like plans, you could say it kind of looks like maybe like an international package where we're like, here's our housing, we're offering the subsidies and things like that, but not even that, just information. Okay, we know that this apartment complex has a relationship with us. That's a 20-minute walk from our school. It's actually super. We know that it's safe. This will have, 10-minute walk to this grocery store. Just that information that takes years to know. Well, you have to flounder around in a city. So if you can kind of smoosh that local knowledge about the urban area, I'm coming to Chicago, and if not me, someone else is. There's just so much. And so when people randomly end up in this, where I live, it's so rural that people are like, I'm like, how did you come here? I'm like, okay, this is the restaurant, this is the place, this is kind of what you need to know. If you're curious about this is where you have to go. This is what this street is, this is what this bus line is, if you're talking about a city. So like that stuff isn't on the blogs, it's not in the Fromers, it's collective community knowledge that takes decades to acquire.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. That's fantastic answer to that question. So we have another question in the Q&A box. It says, going back to PD, are there any specific skill areas you wish district leadership would help you or other teachers develop? Any of my panel.
I think classroom management is always a big deal. That's something new teachers struggle with, older teachers struggle with. There's a million reasons why the classroom of today might present challenges. And so hearing a meaningful PD, engaging in a meaningful PD, I think about classroom management is always, interesting to teachers.
I was just gonna say, especially nowadays with, the kind of AI being really like widespread, I think there needs to be a lot more training. Especially when for example, I teach teacher candidates in the program, and a lot of them don't have a lot of PD. And like, for example, with what Elizabeth just shared, and also what Philip just shared, with all of this wide-ranging, knowledge that everybody has, like sometimes it's hard to kind of compile that together. But like, for example, if we just have one talk story session with everybody together, I mean, we have AI can kind of summarize all of that information and be a really good tool to kind of gather all of that together and kind of like put it in a concise form. So I think we're kind of really in a really exciting period over here. And I think that's one of the things that could be focused on.
Oh, I love that. AI is huge. Just technological advancements are huge. I will say when I was an administrator, both school level and district level, the number one thing that I saw that pulled teachers out of the classroom was issues with classroom management. So Elizabeth, fully agree there. That is why I believe that module 4, which is a 6-week module within our Teach Now teacher preparation certificate program, is one of my favorite, because I feel like it sets that teacher candidate up for success in that area. And this is an area where, like you hit the nail on the head. It's not just new teachers, but also veteran teachers can use help in this area, because the students, their climate, their culture, their life experiences, the way they behave and act is different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So we can all definitely use a little help in this area. Thank you so much. All right. Any final words from anyone on the panel before we wrap up?
I think that's also helpful to have people in the workforce that are education adjacent, to communicate with educators, because sometimes we're trying to create real world solutions, but we're not always understood from the academic lens in which we're working. But also we can use that real world support, but also we can do a lot within the classroom to support those applications. So there is a lot of opportunities there as well that can make both workforces more pleasurable.
Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship that can be developed there. Love that. One additional question from the audience. Any advice for an individual getting their master's and teacher certification in adult education or early childhood?
Is this individual working in a school already or soon to work in a school? Do we know?
Well, I would say in both of those cases, those are both areas I think where less attention is sometimes paid to early childhood, like very young children, and then adult education. And the assumption is sometimes that things are self-evident, like, oh, well, I've been around children, I've been around adults. And my experience at Moreland is that there were so many things that I thought, well, of course I know this. Like I've been around the block. I know these things. And like, I would say really find somebody who's an expert in those areas and get the explicit training in those areas. And that's so helpful. You know, anybody who has an open mindset and goes into it saying like, I want to learn more. And then finding people who really know a lot about early childhood education, about adult education, and not assuming that all the knowledge that we already have about so many things that we know about would transfer to those specific areas.
Very good. I would just echo, if you're trying to decide between the two, really truly analyze where your passion is. You want to go into an area where you are passionate, because that passion is going to push you through the tough times. And as we know, as teachers or in any profession, there will be tough times. So set yourself up for success in that way. One final question that did come in for our panelists. Any thoughts on exit or stay interviews? Do you believe that they're impactful?
I guess it's going to depend on the intention behind them. Why are you doing them? Are you actually, if it's a stay interview, are you actually going to try to make some sort of a stay, or are you going to act like some attempt to help that teacher stay, or are you going to just placate them, you know, when you're talking to them? Are you just trying to smooth things over? Why do you want that exit interview? Are you just doing it because that's what you were taught to do, or do you actually intend to take those words somewhat seriously and not write them off immediately? So I guess it always is going to depend on, in this case, the impact will be directly correlated to the intention of the individual.
Absolutely. It kind of goes back to like, know your why. Why are you doing it? What's your purpose? What's your intention? And I personally believe that they can be very impactful if they're done with the right motive. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. It has been an absolute joy to host this webinar. I have learned so much from each and every one of you, and thank you all to our attendees for joining us today as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all. Bye.
Nice to meet you too.